Welcome. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about a small open source project. The cool thing is I've been lucky to be working on an open source project that was reasonably successful because it's also a nice playground. You can actually try new things. And what's even more cooler is that people actually contribute to a popular open source project. And you can learn from that as well. People introduce new technologies, new tools, new features in C# that you probably didn't know of. And so for me, it's like one big playground, and I'm a consultant, so I use that information as well, or that knowledge as well, to help my clients. So the funny thing is, when you put numbers in a slide like this, it will actually increase every time you do the talk. Like it was 250 million last year, now it's 320 million I saw this morning, 323. I have no clue. Doesn't matter. I'm Dennis Doomen. I'm from the Netherlands. You can probably hear that. I'd like to call myself a hands-on architect or a coding architect. I've been doing that for 27 years. I basically help my clients modernize everything that has to do with software development. So I look at tools, architecture, practices, TDD, event sourcing, stuff like that. I care about, and I basically look at the whole thing from the beginning to the end, usually as part of a path towards continuous deployment. I'm also a Microsoft MVP since a year. No clue how I got that. I have no clue how to stay that. But it's worth mentioning. Yeah, that's how it works. It's a kind of a marketing thing. But I'm happy with it. Yeah, I'm happy with it. My Twitter handle is ddoomen. I call myself the continuous improver. So I have a couple of things. I have a blog post nobody cares about. I have actually published C# coding guidelines for the last 20 years. You can take them, you can fork them, you can change that for your own company, which is useful if you care about this kind of stuff. Somebody else actually created a nice roster analyzer that does that for you. I have worked in event sourcing projects. I built my own libraries or frameworks for that. I maintain this one. And maybe, and this is kind of the topic, who knows this one? Who's using this? Who's not using it? Why not? No, no, just kidding. This is the project that I'm talking about. Okay. Oh, and if you create a cool picture of the presentation or a very sad picture, or you have something very, I don't know, profound to say about this presentation, you can actually win a 1-year license for JetBrains Rider. Yeah, okay. And oh, by the way, these are all my handles where you can find me and talk to me or make fun of me. So about the project, yeah, what is it? I probably don't know if to explain. It's a stupid little library that is supposedly makes your unit test more readable. It's fluent. There's a couple of things. You can use it to verify that a particular action throws an exception or not. It can actually do kinds of reflection-based, dependency tracking. You can actually compare entire object graphs together. All this stuff is there. And again, why is it popular? Is it successful? I don't know, actually. I only realized it when people at some point started to create a Pluralsight training about it. And I thought, why on earth would you create a Pluralsight training about a unit test library? Doesn't get it. But yeah, it's increasing. And every time I do this talk, I have to update the numbers. That's the thing. This is actually the most important, or the most, let's say, profound point in time when I discovered that Microsoft is actually using it. I mean, as an open source developer, it's all free time. You spend your free evenings on this. That's pretty cool, actually. And it's used a lot of different repositories. Why is it? I can come up with all kinds of cool terms, but I have no clue. I honestly have no clue. This is, I think, why it seems to be successful, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you know it, you're already using it, and I don't have to explain that. So, yeah, let's just see how it starts, and I'll take you from the inception of an idea or a feature request all the way to the release cycle, everything we do in between. I'm also a big proponent of GitHub, by the way, so a lot of stuff is GitHub related, but you'll figure that out. Okay, so it all starts like, okay, where's the repository? So we have an organization called Fluent Assertions, which is technically just a GitHub thing. There's no money or anything. I mean, I don't earn any cent from this whole project, other than I'm here, which is cool because this conference has an awesome location. And there you find the main project, and there's a bunch of other projects which are maintained by other people, which we kind of said like, okay, you can be part of the organization because they're semi-official, but I don't maintain it. Neither does my colleague Jonas do that. I have one other guy that's helping me, and I've met him twice, I think. One on video, one in live, in NDC Oslo last year. This is where it starts. And then people can go there and then, create an issue. So the interesting thing is we don't want people to create issues. Just like you don't want to have that done in your project, you want to have some structure in that issue create. You want to understand what's going on. So what's really cool is that in GitHub, you can actually use templates. So this is what you get if you create an issue. If you want to create an issue, you have to choose. Like, is it a bug report? Is it an API suggestion? Is it a feature or something like that? And also references to all kinds of stuff, like the documentation is here. Ask questions on Stack Overflow. Nobody's using Stack Overflow these days. We have AI now, right? Unfortunately, nobody actually clicks on the sponsor fluent assertions thing. That's a shame. But anyway, and that's actually pretty easy to do in GitHub. So if you're already using GitHub for your internal projects, you can also do that, which streamlines the whole process. The thing is, if somebody proposes a feature, fluent assertion is almost like a real project. You actually have to think about the impact of that new feature, of that new API. You need to think about consistency. You need to think like, do I even want this API? And initially, we actually had people, spending a lot of time creating a pull request, which was a nice big feature. And then we looked at it like, yeah, but we don't want this, actually. We don't want this. And we have actually accepted the pull request that we should never have accepted because it introduced so much work or so much maintenance for us. But the person behind that spent so much time on it, and you feel almost sorry about that. Well, that is something we try to streamline by having this approval process. So if somebody proposes something, we put a label on it, like API suggestion, the bottom one, and then we have a discussion about that, and at the end, we may either reject it, or we need to have some follow-up discussion about it until we approve it. Really like a backlog process where your PO also proposes something. Same thing. It's just that GitHub is becoming better and better at this and streamlining this process. And then, you can see like there's a couple of examples. And actually, what we also ask people, don't actually create a pull request until we've approved the proposal. So to save you from some time. Again, some people ignore it. We just ignore them as well. Then design challenges. The libraries, it was very extensible. And I guess most computer systems that you build have some sense of extensibility, unless it's a one-off thing. And building extensibility is very complicated because you kind of have to predict the future, like how you're going to be able to extend that. Developers love abstractions and, unnecessary complexity. No, of course, it's necessary complexity. It's not. And you have to take that into account. So when somebody proposes something, we have to take into account things like, do we want this to be in the main library? Or do we may have something, does this have to be an extension? I just mentioned data sets. Is anybody still using data sets in 2024? No, see? Oh, somebody does like this. No. So we accepted a huge pull request that added data set support. And now we have to rip it out again. And that is something that you have to think about. Breaking changes, it's very easy to introduce breaking changes. I guess if your organization is sufficiently big, you're also building all kinds of reusable libraries or packages or components so that you can actually, prevent developers from doing everything twice or three times. Building those things is also a form of extensibility. And thinking about breaking changes is hard. Especially if you made the wrong choice, now you want to fix that, that introduces a breaking change, now what? So we have to think about that. Consistency, like this, a collection should all satisfy. And you can pass in a predicate. What should happen if the collection is empty? Does it mean it's actually okay? Or should it throw an exception? That's stuff that you have to think of. It really, takes a lot of energy to think about that. And again, it's a side job. So if it's a full-time job, records, tuples, how do you deal with that? C# changes all the time. Async, do we want to async postfix on our async stuff or not? That can also become almost like a religious debate. That's what we have to think about. So if you actually go to a repository, there's a couple of things you will see. There's a proper README. I actually want all the repos at my clients' repositories to have a proper README. Explanation, how to build it. What do you need to be able to build it? How do you test things? How do you run the thing? What are the prerequisites? And also all these batches, like what's the code coverage? Where's the link to the build pipeline? This, of course, is an open source project, so we also have like statistics, downloads and stars and contributors, which you don't care about in an internal project, but I still want to have a proper README. It's just surprising how many repositories I'll find at my clients or my projects that have no description whatsoever. And then, I should be able to, maybe I've heard of this thing that you should go into a company, bless you, go into a company and you should be able to clone the repository, get it to run within 5 minutes. Well, maybe that's idealistic, but it's a good measurement to be able to see how far you can get with that. So I tried it. This is part of it. Also, what does it mean to contribute to that project? So I'm a big proponent of inner sourcing. So I like the different teams in an organization to be able to contribute to each other. So they should actually go into a repository and be able to clone it, create a pull request, suggest something in the same way as I do it in an open source project. Because that's a really great way of distributing knowledge, but also to have teams work together and really work together effectively. I think this is one of the major things the open source world has contributed to professional software development. I'm not saying, by the way, that open source is not professional, at least not this one. So we have guidelines. What do you expect from you? If you want to contribute, what do we expect from you? You know, this is a sensitive topic because sometimes people just throw something over the wall and then magically expect the open source developer to fix that. Same internally. If you throw something over the wall to another team, do you expect the other team to fix it? Do you want to contribute to that? Then at least you need to understand what is expected from you. That's what the guidelines do. Release notes is also part of that. We actually generate that with documentation. All of that is part of the same repo. Again, if you're building internal components or libraries, this is a nice way of doing it. So we actually build that website from the source code, including functional release notes. So you have also technical release notes. I'll show you that momentarily. But this is important. So for this open source project, if somebody actually proposes a feature or creates a pull request, we expect them to also amend the functional release notes or update the documentation. And that's pretty cool if you can do that in one pull request, right? Because you have the whole package together. Exactly like I do at my clients' projects. Git tools that I work with, it's cool because you have a repo. There's a couple of things I use. Windows Terminal, in this case. You probably have seen these screenshots before. I like Windows Terminal because you have different kind of, you can use PowerShell, you can use command prompts, whatever you want. There's a couple of other things I use. Well, PowerShell, obviously. Oh My Posh, that's the one that gives you all the colors on your command line. And by the way, I'm not actually, no, next slide. PS readline, which is nice for history features. You can actually do up and then complete the last command. Again, if you use CLI a lot, some people don't. And I have a lot of aliases, Git aliases as well. And they're beautiful because they allow me to be very productive. And for example, I can use Git save as an extension that just takes whatever I have in my working directory, push it to a repository so I don't have to think about that, instead of creating a commit end of the day or something like that. And I just keep amending that. There's a whole set of them, and Phil Hack has all these things documented in this article. And the Z location or Z location, which is a very smart CD command. I just type Z and then FLU for fluent, and it will jump directly to the last directory that has that name. So especially if you use CLI commands a lot. Interestingly enough, I don't actually use the CLI only. So I'm a pragmatic person, at least I'd like to think that. Some of my colleagues don't agree, but so I actually like to combine things. So, you know, using command lines is very efficient, switching between branches, amending my changes, pushing them to a repository. But at the same time, I need to have an overview. So I actually use a Git UI to be able to aggregate my commits and figure out which changes should actually go in which commits, especially if I want to rebase. I do a lot of interactive rebases. And who's doing interactive rebases? Nobody's doing interactive rebases. Who's merging? Who's creating all these merge lines? You know, this is the big rainbow thing? Yeah, okay. Cool. Proud that you actually admit that. No, this is Git Kraken, which up to now is my favorite tool. I've used Fork, I've used SourceTree, Smart Git. None of them I like. This one I still like. I know I also use Rider from JetBrains. It has some pretty strong internal Git tooling, but I still switch back to this one because I like the colors. It gives me overview. I like to have an overview of things. So patterns and guidelines that we use. Well, who's not using an editor config? You know, the biggest struggle with code reviews, if you start, you know, I was going to use some word that I'm not going to use because this is being recorded. If you start complaining about people's alignment and stuff, tabs versus spaces and stuff like that, if you just add a proper editor config to your repository, you can just, you know, solve all of that for you. The compiler will automatically detect that. And if you use a good IDE like Visual Studio Code or Rider or something like that, you can even convert it to completely automatically format all your code. And it can also apply the latest changes that C# introduces, like the new array or collection initializers. It will just automatically fix that up for you, so you don't even have to bother talking about that during your code review. That's an important thing. This is one of the first things I do with an existing legacy code base, and I love legacy code because I can change it to my own will. Roslyn analyzers, also very useful in the .NET space. There's a lot of them. Examples are the Roslinator, the one that comes with .NET, the one that I cannot pronounce, the Mesian2 analyzer, I'm still not sure whether it's French or another language. The C# guidelines analyzer, that's actually one created by a Dutch guy that uses my coding guidelines as a starting point. And then you use your editor config to tune the settings, like which rules do you want, which rules should be a warning, which one should be a suggestion. And they can do smart things. You know, it can actually check that your XML comment is not actually wrong, or that you're using the wrong link syntax because it causes performance issues. There's stuff in there that I didn't even know because it was introduced in newer versions of .NET 6. Maybe nested conditional statements, you know, the question mark and then the semicolon, and then somebody uses another question mark with another semicolon, you know, this kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't be doing that. So there's a Roslyn analyzer that will just doesn't compile. That's one way. Long methods, of course, it's very subjective, but I have set it up on 40 lines. If your method is longer than 40 lines, I actually want to have a good, deep conversation with you. Single type of file, correct exceptions type. Who's actually saying throw new exception in C#? By the way, who's actually doing .NET? C#? Most of the people, yeah. You shouldn't actually do that. These are internal types. They're not supposed to be used. There's a Roslyn analyzer for you. Or that you actually await an async method. Or that you actually dispose an idisposable. Stuff like that. There's so many mistakes I've seen in production that a simple Roslyn analyzer can fix for you. So we use that as well. Naming a grouping of unit tests. I'm a big proponent of test-driven development. I've been practicing it for like last 15 years. I struggled, I failed, I made lots of mistakes in the first 5 to 10 years. Now I like to think I found a sweet spot. Probably not, but anyway. And I experimented a lot with naming. So in the past, we used something like, when the same objects are expected to be the same, it should not fail. For very functional though. And yeah, it's using a combination of snake casing with proper, the first character is uppercase because it's English. But at some point, I've tried this for many years, I felt like, it's a bit long, a bit verbose, maybe we can do better. So I tried other things, especially if you have like multiple methods or you want to group a couple of different scenarios so you don't want to repeat the context in every test name. I started actually using like a nested class. In this case, it's the reference type specs. And oh, by the way, specs, I use specs to emphasize that my tests are actually specifications of behavior. I group them using a public class, and then I don't have to repeat the fact that which API or which context I have. But I found that still quite long, so I've been experimenting with all kinds of other versions, and eventually we settled on this. So really factual, short names, still functionally correct, and the context, so the base class, the parent class, and the top-level class together should give you enough context to understand the scenario. Because my test should have functional names, because I want to understand what the test is supposed to do. And then I can actually see if the implementation does what it does. So quite often, or almost always, when I review a pull request, here on my professional projects, I actually look at the test as a first thing. Because they're specifications. They're supposed to give you an indication of what is the scope of something, what are the internal boundaries of the system, and what kind of behavior do you expect from that. Does that make sense? I hope it does. Anyway, that's what we do. We also document exceptions. I'm not sure that's a really good thing. I'm still not convinced about that. It's a lot of work, maybe a bit too puristic. I like to avoid the dogmatism. But somebody found it important, but I don't do this in my professional projects anymore. We tried it for a while. It's too much work, and if you really need to understand the the thing is, you shouldn't actually catch exceptions. If exceptions happen, either it's a well-known thing, but usually it's not the case. You throw them because something unexpected happened. If it's unexpected, you shouldn't actually expect it, right? Yeah, it's a paradox. It's a paradox. I know. That's what it looks like, of course. Especially if you have bigger projects, there's usually lots of projects within the solution. And if you want to have the same settings applied to all your projects, since a year or two, there's something called directory build.props, which is a generic file. You can put it in any folder, and there you can put all the reusable elements in there. I don't know if you know that, but we use it a lot. So you just copy-paste this somewhere in a folder, and then all the projects underneath will basically honor those settings. which is nice. In this case, I'm actually including all the style cop analyzer Roslyn, the C# coding guidelines, the Roslinator, and then the one that I cannot pronounce will be included automatically and applied to all the projects underneath that. So that's one way of doing it. What else? Yeah, sometimes, well, most often I use this arrange, act, assert syntax for my tests. Probably you've used that as well. But sometimes you have tests which are more complicated, more orchestrational. And in those cases, I like to adopt a more like a BDD style way. Quite often you also have to dispose something at the end of the test. And then I use chill, which is one of the libraries I maintain. I didn't create that. Where you can do stuff like, it should try to compare classes. And then, what is it? On top you have given, when, and then the fact is the then. So you get like given, when, then, which is more BDD style. And the nice thing is you can actually have automatically clean up stuff. So you can override the dispose. And this is the base class, but it also can clean up all things for yourself. It has a built-in dependency injection framework. If you're interested in that, just go to chill BDD and check out the examples. It's quite nice. I don't use it that often. Again, I don't use anything I don't need, but it can be useful for that. Feeding data to tests is also something that happens a lot. I don't know if you know, but recently, I think last year, XUnit introduced a new mechanism. Probably you heard of the theory thing that you could use, but it's untyped. Now you have theory data. So you can actually define a method, join using writing style test cases, and give it a specific type. And then you can take a dependency on that by saying member data, name of this method, and then your entire test here is completely type safe. I only found out because somebody from the contributors actually proposed this. Like, oh, I didn't know that. Completely missed that. And that's the case. You know, we as a developers, we do not know everything. And we're not always up to date. I mean, that's why you're at the conference to learn new things, right? The same for me. And being an open source developer is a nice way because you get to see a lot of new things. And you get to go to London for free, which is also nice, by the way. New C# versions, yeah, there's plenty of talks about that. I completely rely on my IDE to tell me about that. So yeah, that's how it works. I mean, I do read some blog posts occasionally, but quite often you forget about these things. So my IDE is actually telling me, hey, you can do better than that. He's right, I can do better than that. So for example, the top one, you know, what is it doing? It's almost unreadable, right? It says like, if the previous character is an ampersand, and the statement is longer than 2 characters, and the last but two one is a $, and the one before that or after that is an ampersand, like, okay. Or, well, this is unreadable, right? At least I hope it is for me. Now you can do, if the previous char is an ampersand, and the statement looks like a collection with those two at the end, well, that's nice. I didn't know that. JetBrains Writer, actually, I don't have any stakes in JetBrains, by the way. It's just that, yeah, it's a good tool. Actually did that for me. And there's other examples. I mean, this one, I don't even want to try to explain that. It's unreadable. But this one is a little bit better. So if the method call expression is not an object with 2 things, then we should be fine. You could debate whether that actually makes it better, or I should completely rewrite the code. But it will actually, the IDE ReSharper does the same thing. It will actually suggest you to use pattern matching, which is nice. I never saw the real value of pattern matching, but I've changed my mind. It's getting better and better. And if you really, really, really have to work with regular expressions, you can actually, use an attribute, and then the IDE in this case will actually help you complete and explain what the regular expression is doing. Of course, who's actually using AI tools during daily development? Copilot, AI assistant. Really, so few people. Man, everybody else is going to be so slow compared to the 5 that raised their hands. So no, you should. It's really it completely changed the way I look at stuff, and it's made me so much more productive. Which my boss doesn't like because clients charge me, or we charge them by the hour. So it's better if I do it very slow, of course. No. One of the problems that a lot of people have is, yeah, but you know what? We're all on an older version of C# or .NET. How do we do that? Well, that's really cool. It's good that you ask. There's a library, an open source library, called Polysharp. And Polysharp will figure out what version of the compiler you have, what language, and generate the missing types. So a lot of these attributes, like if you use the newer compiler versions, you don't need the new .NET versions. Usually the .NET version introduces the attributes, but this little library will figure out like, okay, you're actually on .NET 4.8. If you actually create your own attribute with the same namespace, The compiler will allow you to do stuff like the new things, like the indexing thing I showed you earlier. This will generate it for you. You just add to the project, and suddenly all these new features will light up. It's beautiful. It's really cool. Polysharp. I don't know, anybody using this? Nobody, see? You learned something new from me, if that's the only thing. See, this is what it actually looks behind. And it's using source generators, so that's really cool. So building and testing locally, I mean, even the library is pretty complicated, but most projects that I work with are even bigger than that. Wouldn't it be cool if you can actually build your project and test and everything that you would do on your build pipeline also locally? Is anybody using Azure DevOps? Oh, I'm sorry about that. But the thing is, you don't, and probably also YAML? YAML? Anybody YAML? Yes? Oh, I'm sorry about that. So building and testing locally is actually pretty easy. One of the things I do is I use Nuke. Not the best term, best name for a library these days, but basically it does this. It allows you to completely encapsulate your build process as a bunch of C# targets. If you've used with Make in the past, or maybe Cake, or Sake, which was a PowerShell version, Nuke is brilliant. Essentially, you define all your targets in code, and then this is what it looks like at runtime. You can run the whole build script locally, and whether you run it from Azure DevOps pipelines, or GitHub Actions, or TeamCity, it doesn't matter. The effect is the same. So you completely decouple yourself from the build agent, which is nice because, I mean, Fluent Assertion is pretty simple. You compile, run some tests, do some code checking, spell checking, and create a NuGet package out of that. But most projects are much more complicated. If you also use infrastructure as code, using Pulumi, for example, you can kick off Pulumi from Nuke. Again, not the best term, best name. And if you run it locally, you ask for the questions, or you ask what it can do, you get all the options. You can define parameters, you can pass them in the command line or as environment variables. But what I really love is being able to get a graph of my build pipeline. What does it work? This is locally. So everything you do can be done locally. And that is awesome. And it's C#, which means your build script, you can refactor it, you can debug it. Yeah, you get IntelliSense. You can do whatever you want to do with your C# code. Try that with YAML? No? No? Exactly. So I'm being recorded, but I hate YAML, just for the record. I mean, except for simple configuration stuff. But the build script is not configuration. That's a lot of things. That's also why I don't like Terraform, for the same reason. And this is free. You can use it, and it's awesome. I use it in all my projects. And everybody that used it, initially says like, what's the big deal? It's the build script. And then they use it and like, wow, it's so nice. Like Fluent Assertion, it's just nice. It's not crucial for your development flow, but it's a nice small thing. And this is what it looks like, or what it can look like. And it's very powerful. You can start very simple. It can create some plumbing, a starting kit, and it's actually a project in your solution. So everything that applies to C# also applies here. Editor config, Roslyn analyzers, whatever you want. Really cool. And everything, there's a lot of stuff that it doesn't do, or it doesn't support out of the box. It can work with any tool. And that's cool. It works with any tool. It can dynamically download NuGet packet tools. You can even call local executables, all from C# in a nice way. And you don't have to think about last exit code and stuff like that. So if you have your build scripts in bash files or PowerShell, throw them out of the door and switch to Nuke. Another thing we do is, because it's an open source library, and I don't want to introduce breaking changes, just like I don't want to do with packages, we use approval tests. What does it mean? We use a package called public API generator, which will generate, and I think it's an XML file by the top of my head, representing the public API of your library, of your assembly, your project. So including internal protected parameters, return types, and stuff like that. Then we use another tool called Verify, and we have a snapshot of that file stored in source control. So this is just a unit test that runs, an automatic test, and that will just regenerate the thing. So if you create a pull request that accidentally breaks the public contract, your test will fail. And it will actually tell you what you changed. Oh, you changed the return type. That could be a potential breaking change. And then you have the choice of fixing it, or saying, I'm accepting the change, so I'm going to accept the snapshot, put it in source control, and after that, it's a change. We use that in all the libraries that we built internally. And with big projects, you usually have lots of small packages that you can reuse. By the way, I completely lost track of time. Until what time do I have, actually? Until what time?
Yeah, half an hour.
And, oh, 20 minutes?
30 minutes.
Oh, 30 minutes. Okay, I have to go faster. Because I still have 100 slides. No, just kidding. So this is an example of a failing test. Benchmarking, yeah, of course, it's a library. It has certain speed characteristics. So we use the very popular benchmark.net. We don't use it in a build pipeline because that requires the same hardware all the time. But we do use it sometimes for performance. If somebody complains about the performance, we have a couple of these example benchmark scripts that will give us some results. And then we can also see if certain changes actually improve the performance. It's a very powerful technique. If you have dedicated build agents, so controlled environments with controlled hardware specs, you can actually use that to get quick early feedback that somebody actually broke the performance. And that's better to have a build pipeline detect that than a client complaining about that, right? I mean, the earlier you find the problem, the easier it is to detect where the problem came from, ideally from a particular pull request. And this is some output from that. Completely unreadable, quite difficult to decipher, but it's very useful. Again, it's a tool that you can use or not. In terms of documentation, yeah, we actually have the website. I'm also using these for internal projects to build little documentation, SDK kind of websites, both for internal teams, but sometimes you also build extension points that external clients and partners can use. This is a nice way of doing it. It's a Jekyll site. It's based, in this case, it's built based on a template that I got from the internet, minimal mistakes. You can actually build your website locally. You can run it, you can test it, and make it part of the pull request. I use Jekyll for that, which is a nice structure for that. And, and to make sure that the website doesn't contain any spelling mistakes, neither does my code or the release notes, we use cspell, which is an NPM package. And like, wait, what? You're using JavaScript in a .NET library? Yeah, why not? I mean, it's a great tool. You just use it in my build pipeline. So the same Nuke thing that you saw earlier has a step that will dynamically download the right NPM version, execute this script against the documentation, so we get early feedback, because it's very annoying if you create a new release and there's spelling mistakes in that. I mean, maybe somebody doesn't care about that, but we actually got quite some pull requests with spelling mistakes. I mean, it's nice for the person to officially contribute to a project with so many downloads, but still, I mean, it's a nice enhancement. And you can see it executed as Nuke does it. The color is not that nice, but if you want to try, you can go to the repo, clone it, and run the build script, and you see exactly this. About merging and reviewing, yeah, that's a big thing. Happens a lot. I hope. Is everybody using pull requests? Or are people still merging directly into production? Yeah, you laugh, but I've seen really strange things in my career. Professionally, I mean. So a really big source of pull requests in GitHub is Dependabot. I don't know if you know that. Dependabot is a tool within GitHub. Azure DevOps doesn't have it. I don't know. I'm not saying you should go away from Azure DevOps. I'm saying that. But Dependabot actually figures out all your dependencies, npm, NuGet, whatever you're using, Maven, and will automatically create pull requests for you. And that is nice. Because one of the biggest problems I've seen in some of my clients is that they don't actually update all the dependencies because nobody cares about them or forget about that. Dependabot will do that for you. And that's important because we have a lot of them. It will also detect vulnerabilities, and provide fixes for that. That on itself is already worth the money, because if that vulnerability ends up in production and then somebody runs into it or finds it, you might actually have to go through certain levels of certain channels that are very expensive to go through. You have to report your clients. There's an example. There's a whole bunch of pull requests. One of the flip sides is that you may actually get too many pull requests. So you can tweak that process to only do it once a week. You can tweak it completely. You can even say that, you know what, we have, if you're using XUnit, for example, XUnit is actually 3 or 4 packages. And of course, initially, Dependabot will say you have this package and then that package and then that dependency in a certain order. You can actually add a configuration file that tells us that you would actually want to have group updates. So everything related to XUnit, everything related to NUnit is one update that updates the whole set. The same with ASP.NET Core and all the Microsoft libraries, you can tweak that. Also, and this is not here, but GitHub in January introduced a major change where they're now using AI to kind of predict how often you update the packages. So you can actually tell it like, you know what, I don't want you to complain about this package for a while, and it will not do that. Or it will also detect that you kind of closed certain pull requests instead of merging them. And then it will try to figure out, okay, that probably means you don't want to update that package again and not bother you with that. Well, that kind of stuff, no other supplier can do that. We looked at Snyk and all these, they're not that far. Dependabot is really, really good. Of course, it's from the people behind Copilot, so it's kind of expected. Another thing is, which GitHub offers out of the box, is CodeQL, which is a vulnerability and also like misuse of certain principles. It will do SQL injection detection and stuff like that. It will verify that you don't put passwords in your repository. And I'm surprised, I don't know if you have that, but I've seen my share of passwords in GitHub repositories and Azure DevOps repositories, and in files and all over the place. It will detect that automatically. That on itself is quite useful, by the way. So we have also enabled that. GitHub Actions, kind of Azure pipeline, stuff like that. Yeah, we use that. But again, we only use it as a trigger because Nuke is the one that's doing the real work, and it just reports the output. You can see that here. We have like multiple builds. We have a main build. We run the unit test on Ubuntu. We run the unit test on macOS to see that everything works, because we did see some changes here. Again, not as applicable to every project, but it works. We have a nice configuration. And actually, this is all the YAML that I have, and I'm willing to bear with. It's really a limited thing. See, this is just getting the .NET SDKs. You cannot read this from the far end, but it doesn't matter. It runs on Windows. I'm checking out the source control, source code, one level deep. I'm saying I need certain .NET versions, and then I just run build.ps1, and that's doing the real work. And the build.ps1 is the one that triggers the whole C# build pipeline, which is nice. Code coverage. Who has a code coverage of more than 90%? Who has a code coverage of less than 50%? Who doesn't know? Yes, that's the case. I don't think code coverage, by the way, is something that you should really, well, you have to be careful how it's very valuable. Being able to understand how much test coverage you have and where are the black spots, in your code base is very useful. Using it as a metric, especially by managers as a KPI, it's a bad thing. That being said, the open source library that we have, I don't think you can see it, has currently 97% code coverage. That is ridiculous. Nobody should be doing that. It just happens because some of my contributors, they were so, let's say, overzealous that they want to increase the level. But it's very dangerous because you can also lead to having unit tests at the wrong scope. And that's even worse. That can kill your whole attempt to introduce test-driven development. But it's nice to be able to report that. In this case, it's also open source based, so you can do that as well. If you use Sonar Cloud or something like that, you also get this kind of stuff. If you use Sonar Cloud, disable the duplication thing, because that duplication thing leads to overuse of dry. I don't know if you was in the architecture presentation early on about the vertical slice architecture. That was a really good presentation, by the way. So we use that. We don't use Sonar Cloud. We use Codana, which is from JetBrains. It's still relatively new. We were kind of early adopters of it, and we also worked together to get feedback. I haven't made up my mind yet which one is better. I think Sonar Cloud also has improved considerably the last 2 years or something. In my last presentation, I actually was mentioning about Sonar Cloud, and I was actually the engineer of Sonar Cloud in the group. And we had a nice chat about it, and I explained my frustrations, and he explained that he had the same frustration. So we just, No, I'm kidding. This is also interesting. So some people say I can be a nitpick. And they're usually right. I can be a nitpick. I really care about the quality. So one of the things that changed the way I do code reviews, and I'm going really quick, I know that, it's a big presentation, is I now use emojis before my comment. And why is that useful? Because that emoji forces me to think about how important is this thing that I'm actually commenting about. Is it a nitpick? Is it something I really want to be changed? Is it something I want to have a discussion about, but the person can ignore me? They can't. Or maybe a seed. This is something that I want you to think about. You don't have to fix it right now, but I hope it actually sticks in the back of my mind, like the next time we should actually address that. This has helped me tremendously. Yeah, this is the pick, the nitpick. It's a little axe, what is it called? A pickaxe. That's nice. It's just a small little trick, but it helped me really make a difference. And every time now I use the pick, so that sounds really weird, the pickaxe, I wonder okay, should I even mention this? Because I know I'm nitpicking. And maybe the first time I do it, and then the next time I don't do it anymore, because I expect the person The next time it's just a cross, now you have to fix it. No, but it helped. It really helped me. And also made my pull request more friendly. I worked with a developer. I met him after 12 years or something. And he said, yeah, you know what? I still remember you, like from the last project. Remember that you, and this is really true, that you printed out the code, took a red pencil, and started to code review thing. I don't even have a memory of that, but apparently it happened. So yes, that's me 20 years ago. I'm 50, so I'm probably a bit more professional, mature, and less picky now. No, I'm not. But anyway, this is nice that you can try. The other thing is, and this is with pull requests, sometimes you have to say no. And I already gave the example earlier about the dataset thing. We should have never accepted it. But we did, because we're trying to be friendly, especially in the open source community. If you're not friendly, you immediately get canceled. So you don't want that. But we have to say no sometimes. And then we have to explain, within the inside projects, clients project, of course, we talk with the tech leads or something and figure out, like, what, we don't want this. Let's, nicely say that. In Fluent Assertions, I do back checking with my other colleague on Slack, and we have discussions like, what, I'll be the one saying no, because he doesn't like that. I'm more a red person. He's more like a green, yellow person, if that says anything. So I'll just say, we talked about it, and we feel that it's not actually fits in this project. So hopefully you understand this, that we're closing your pull request right now. Click. This has happened. And there was one person actually joined the Slack channel to try to convince us, and we eventually had to say, sorry, we get your point. It's our project. You can fork it. No, you can't. But you can build your own. Yeah, that's the truth. It's the same in your real project, right? If you're an architect or tech lead, you sometimes have to say no. You try to explain to people, but some developers just don't get it. They're so stubborn, like me. The other thing is, I actually discovered that I got less critical with code reviews. But my colleague Jonas has a very keen eye. He really looks at the details. He looks at he cross-references every change with something in the past. He tries to keep everything consistent. It's really annoying, sorry Jonas, but it's actually really useful because we have different views. I actually look at the bigger picture, like the direction, the vision, does it fit together? And he's the one looking at all the details, which is nice because I spend less time on code reviews and he's doing the hard work. So I let him review first, and if he's happy, then I'll come in. No, but this is good. Like I actually also in my own internal projects, we always have 2 reviewers because you have people with different views, different perspectives, and they should have that, which can be annoying sometimes because one person has a comment, then it's fixed, and the other person has a different comment. Yeah, that can happen, but we try to avoid that. By the way, there was a really good presentation yesterday by, I forgot her name, about reviewing. If you were not there, check it out because there was so much useful information there that I also liked about that. So I should have mentioned. By the way, the emoji thing wasn't there, but she's doing that as well. Who cares about a clean source control history? Only 3. The rest doesn't care. Anybody? Well, only 4 people were doing interactive rebases. I really care because it's really complicated if you have this history with all these lines going in, trying to figure out what happened at what point of time. I actually go back into, some people call it a code archaeologist. I go back in time quite often trying to understand what was the worm in the head of the developer at that point in time that they changed that code. And the worst example I've seen, well, not maybe the worst, but a very bad one, is somebody changed the SQL timeout to 60 seconds. Default is 15 seconds in .NET. So I was wondering, like, why did somebody change that? Why would you do that? So I went to source control, did a blame, figured out, found the pull request. You know what it says? Increase the timeout to 60 seconds. Great. Now I know nothing. And that's why I care about this stuff. I do it a lot, so I'm very picky about this stuff. I want people to rebase. I want people to use fix-up commits. And I've used that before. It's very nice. I wrote a blog post about that to try to get that clean history. Because it's really, really difficult to figure out what happens in the past. Especially if you have to solve merge conflicts. You have to figure out what happened here. Interactive rebases, and rebases are a really nice way of preventing that. Auto-merging is a feature that GitHub introduced last year. So you basically say, Azure DevOps already had it, by the way. Although Azure DevOps is kind of in maintenance mode, it feels like that. I hope it is. You can basically say, after all the approvals are done, it should be automatically merged. Really not interesting. Releasing, semantic versioning. I don't know if you know. You have a big number. So basically the number means what you can expect. If you have a breaking change, the first number should increase. If it's a minor version that adds backwards compatible functionality or bug fixes, you increase the middle number. And the last one you only increment if you're only shipping bug fixes. The open source library now is on 6.12. We're now working on 7. That's when we're going to rip out, fix all the design mistakes, because we can. But that takes a couple of years. We don't do that that often. And this is also what I use on all my projects. Git flow and GitHub flow is just a nice standard how you should name your branches and how you should organize them. And tools like Git version can actually automatically generate the version number from the branch name, the last tags on Git, the number of commits from there. I use that in all my projects because I don't want to manually change numbers. It should calculate it completely automatically based on the branching strategy. And that's a nice way of doing it. I even use it for database schemas. So you can actually see what's the version of the database schema, what is the version that you're running out, and it can use that to figure out the differences, unless you're using NT Framework. But if you're using Oracle, these things don't work. So that's important to use. This is the tool Git version, another open source project, and this is what it produces. Lots of information, but you see major, minor version. It has these really ridiculous long ones. Informational version, you can't read it, but it says 6.12.0-anonymous types formatting .1 plus 73 branch plus the whole hash key. Being able to go into production, checking out the DLL or exe, seeing the hash key, going to GitHub, and see exactly what committed it can save you a lot of time. How much time do I have left, by the way? Sorry?
15 minutes.
5 minutes?
15.
Oh, 15 minutes. All right. And of course, Git version, you can actually invoke that from your nuke script, obviously, because it's a tool. It does that, by the way, automatically. Releasing, GitHub has release notes generators, which is awesome. Azure DevOps doesn't have that. There are some marketplace things, but it's not very useful. We use that a lot. So every time we create a release, we just say this is the number. And then we have this nice button. Actually, it physically moved recently, I saw. You say, this is the last, 6.11 is the last version, and it will generate the release notes. It will look at the pull request, give you nice information, and it will look like this. And you can completely customize that. So you can put labels on your pull request, like this is a bug fix, this is a breaking change, this is a new feature, this is internal code changes, and you can structure it like that. You get this with the names of the people, with the number, and even new contributors this release. It doesn't cost you any time. You set it up once, and you get release notes for nothing. That's cool. Because if you're in Azure DevOps, it's always a pain to get that done. You can completely customize that. If you want examples, go to Fluent Assertions repo, and you can extract that from there. And it gets better. They keep investing. Also, NuGet packages, if you use that on NuGet, I guess for internal projects, you have your own feed. But if you do use NuGet, you can actually say, I want a reserved prefix. So in this case, nobody can create a package called Fluent Assertions or with a prefix of Fluent Assertions without approval, which is nice because then people cannot pretend they're actually an official package. I don't know, that's not that relevant for most people, but still. Well, there's a lot of things we still need to do because I showed you a lot of little tools and practices that we've used in the past, and we keep discovering new things. We're still not done. Of course, we're currently working on the next major version, V7. That will probably happen in a couple of months, depending on how much time, and all the other conferences is consuming my time. We still haven't applied consistent naming, so all the unit testing naming things I showed you earlier, the code base is not completely consistent. And what I like to do is use the Fluent Assertion code base as a kind of example to other people how I think you should be doing it. Of course, it's opinionated, but it's also a good reference to my clients. So I use Fluent Assertion as a reference to project teams, like, okay, this is how you can do that. Because sometimes, they hear me and they say, like, that sounds nice, but what does it mean? Like, okay, I'll show you that, which is very powerful. Because, the fact that I have a library which is relatively popular actually gives me a certain level of credits that I can use at clients' projects. Because a lot of people ask me, like, how do you convince your teams to adopt a certain principle of practice? Being an open source developer helps with that. For a certain amount of time. If you stay for at a client for 5 years, you lose that credibility, you lose the consultant factor, but that's fact of life. You shouldn't stay that long. Data sets are being extracted. Want to get rid of that, obviously. There's probably other features. Design guidelines. We have lots of guidelines. And as an architect, I usually insist that we write down design guidelines. We also I insist on writing down decisions, architectural decisions, because the most frustrating part is that when you come into a client's project and you find something you don't expect, like you ask, like, why did you go that direction? Why did you adopt MongoDB versus another NoSQL solution? Yeah, somebody decided that, like, but why? Did you look at the pros and cons? There's a lot of decisions that you make. So I insist that we start writing them down. If you have Confluence, for example, which is a nice place, we capture all the design guidelines, like who's involved in the discussion, the pros and cons, the consequence of that decision. You can use why statements. I also want to do that for Fluent Assertion because we do make a lot of decisions. And sometimes really complicated things like, how do you compare to records? Do you compare record as a value type object, or do you compare record by properties? Those were big decisions, at least in my little bubble. And sometimes people ask, like, why do you do that? And it doesn't make sense, and the rest of the world doesn't do that. I want them to refer to the decision that we made. You know, who was involved, why did we, the trade-off, because software development is about trade-offs, right? It's lots of trade-offs, and you want to capture that. So we want to do that as well, because it's important. The 97% code coverage, we got that through mutation testing. Has anybody used mutation testing before? 2 people? Mutation testing, and Striker is a tool in the .NET space that can do that. What it will do, it will try to change your production code and then run your tests and see if any test fails. So, for example, if you use an is operator in your in your code somewhere, it will forcefully revert that, so invert the addition, make it a not is, and then see if a test fails. If no test fails, it means you have a gap in your code coverage, right? Your test coverage. And those tools are expensive in the terms that they take a lot of time to run, takes hours to run, but they're extremely useful, especially if you have legacy code base and you're wondering, like, how can I make my code more robust? And some of these contributors have been running this tool to find the gaps and, and then create pull requests with more unit tests for that, to solve that. I've also used this in production system, and it's extremely useful because, people say, oh, the quality is very high, and then you run the tool and everything falls apart and say, oh, look at this is a nice report. Also great for auditing. You can come in, drop the tool, say, oh, cool, your code base is crap. Hire me to fix it. Yes. It's a nice sales model, I think. I just came up with now. But we want to make it part of the build pipeline. Also looking at ArcUnit, some other speaker was also talking about, it's a free library that allows you to have automatic unit tests that verify that certain projects do not reference each other, or certain namespaces do not reference each other. If you have like this vertical slice architecture, you can use a tool like ArcUnit to make sure that the code in one slice does not directly reference code in another slice, that you do this properly. Ndepend can also do that, but it's very expensive. It's a very powerful tool for the record. ArcUnit is free. And what do we love? Free tools, right? Yes. All right. And exactly. We built a whole website using this Jekyll thingy. Apparently, there's a nice solution, Docusaurus, which I heard about, I think, in NDC Oslo. Somebody told me about. So we're also going to be looking at that. I think there was a lot of content in a small time. I've been speaking quite fast, faster than I usually do. No. If you have any questions, if you want to see examples, you can reach out through all these channels. I hope there was at least something for everybody here. Otherwise, it would be a waste of time. You could have better went to the Kafka session or something like that. I hope you enjoy what is left of the conference. Maybe I'll see you tonight at the PubConf. I'm supposed to be funny, not. I will talk about my legacy systems. That's always good stories because I've seen some bad stuff, which we'll talk about tonight. And thank you for being here. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and maybe I see you next year somewhere on another conference.